good as all of us.
That's okay.
So please, go ahead.
So anyways, the project we're working on is a pathway for students applying to school that grew up as Black people in Nova Scotia. So kind of people that are born in Nova Scotia that are Black heritage, and how can we facilitate their entrance into medical school? And one of the things you would say, well, could you explain your links to the Black community? So I don't understand what it is. And I think that we use the word community. I think the better way to refer to it is replace it with the word people. And I would say, what should we know about Black people in St. John? Not necessarily a community. So, there's people that are Black that would suffer racism, who maybe were adopted by a white family. Right? I myself grew up in a white family in Moncton, so I'm not sure that there's any such thing as a Black community, but I'm pretty sure there's lots of Black people around. So I think what I'm going to do is try to focus my conversation here, my discussion today, about Black people as opposed to communities. But I want to ask you, what do you think about the distinction between the two? Does it resonate with anyone or make sense, or have I missed something?
I think it's a really good way to look at it, because I think we get to, that's kind of a historical community, and you kind of think of that group in a certain spot that does certain things in a different way, when I think you're making it quite a bit broader by saying this is about people,
Right.
not necessarily where you live and kind of the same kind of beliefs you have or whatever that we kind of, I think that's how you get the stereotyping even more. Right? We see that in our community with the various diverse communities we have, and we say, well, this is this community, as opposed to, let's look at the individual.
Yes, exactly.
I think it's a good way.
And I have this discussion all in the hospital sector, where they'll say, we need, say, Indigenous representation on a committee, or we need Black people, Black representation on the committee. And I say, okay, well, just follow me on how ridiculous this statement is. What if I had a white person on a committee and said they represent white people? People would say, what? The fact that they're white has nothing to do with me. I can be white and have completely different opinions than that person. So what makes them think they can actually represent me? And I always tell BLM and all these people in St. John, I said, no other Black guy in St. John represents me, or my attitude, or my opinions. So how can someone think that the fact that you have a Black person somewhere represents me? It just doesn't. And I think this, once again, contributes to stereotypes, right? That we are individuals, we're people. We have our own thoughts. We're allowed to be nice people. We're allowed to be assholes. We're allowed to be whatever we want. And it's got nothing to do with the rest of the people that have the same color of skin as me. Just like with Caucasian people, what some white person over here does has nothing to do with you. And that's what I want to submit about Black people as well. What someone somewhere does, it doesn't have to do with me. But if people reason from a stereotype, then it does have a lot to do with me. And that's kind of where we're going to go today. But is that okay? A reasonable way of proceeding today? And like I said, questions, concerns, comments, please just ask as we go through. You can see I'm in the middle of the academic term, so I am in lecture mode. And I'm sure you guys will be much more generous than my students, because I can't keep them awake. I can't keep them off their phones. I can't even get them to come to class sometimes. So that's the thing. So I want to start off with a short 3-minute video that Matthew and I and another guy did for CBC. And it's just talking about systemic racism. And like I said, everything's going to be linked to this. How do we build better and stronger relationships with Black people in St. John? And I would replace the word community. Is that okay? So this one, first one. Oh, I think I'm going to check with the people online when I start this, because if the audio might or might not come through. So please just let me know. This is called buffering. Do we have a signal? Yeah, we have a full signal. See, of course, right? So, so that's from one of the shows we did, Color Bar. If I leave the screen like this, Christine, are people still okay on Zoom? Can they still see me and stuff?
You have to share the screen.
Okay. Okay, so while she's doing that, let me ask, let me ask 2 questions. Any thoughts, comments on this 3-minute video first? And then I have a couple of directed questions I'll ask. I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm not going to show any more right now. I'm going to show it in a minute. So I just want to make sure that Zoom people can see us. Okay, thank you. Any thoughts, comments, questions on the video?
Just one thought. I think there's some positive news in connection with all this. I'm an immigrant, so I can see that Canada is making headway trying to change these things. And I think that's something that needs to be acknowledged.
Mhm.
So the situation is better at the place side. This is something to mention because I think that's important.
Mhm.
So it's not all challenges. There are some issues there.
Yeah. Well, and one of my friends just moved here from France, and he said, when I came to Canada, I thought it was heaven compared to when we went to in France. And in fact, I was there. I was vacationing in France over the summer, and my family and I, there was me and my wife and her 2 kids and her mother, so my mother-in-law, and the 5 of us show up, and we had suitcases for 5 people, right? So they're all over the place. And the guy who was supposed to help us with the bags, he thought I worked for them. So he said to me, put all their bags in one place and then start bringing it up through the staff elevator over here.
But also about the numbers, no, the statistics coming through from Halifax or Nova Scotia, and what about the transport, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
That's a question that we always ask.
Yeah, so was there a question?
May I, the statistics and the numbers,
Yeah.
How many people are detained or get tickets if they come from the Black people?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So like all of my students here step ahead of me, because we're going to work up to that in a second, as soon as I get through some of the data. But you're absolutely correct. We need local data on that stuff.
Well, and that's actually amazing because they just released on Stats Canada that there's been a 50% reduction in permanent residents becoming Canadian citizens, noting that yes, as much growth as we have done in attracting them, the Canada as a whole is now looking at the fact that they're having problems retaining because people are leaving based on their experience with the unfortunately. That was just released just a few days ago.
Excellent. Yeah. So I have a question for here. We did a whole video on systemic racism, and did we define it? Did we give a definition, an operational definition? As intentional. So just for the sake of discussion, why do you think I would intentionally say we're not going to give an operational definition of systemic racism? Any thoughts? Why would we do something like that on a video titled Systemic Racism and not bother giving a definition? No thoughts? Well, in my opinion, racism is a fundamentally irrational behavior. And since it's an irrational behavior, people are allowed to be arbitrarily racist, they're allowed to be inconsistently racist, they're allowed to be as spontaneously racist as they want to be, because it's irrational. So how can you take a definition that's broad enough to capture most instances of it when the behavior itself is so inconsistent? So for that reason, what I do when I try to teach on this topic is link it to outcomes. So as a scientist, I'm interested in data and statistics and numbers and reasoning from evidence. So as opposed to anecdotes or something like that. So like I said, the reason that we didn't try to define it is because it's almost, I don't know, some of you might be old enough to remember the Supreme Court judgment in the US where the judge said, I can't define pornography, but I know it when I see it. And I think people living with systemic discrimination know it when they're living it, but the definition is secondary. And I have this debate with our premier and some of our other MLAs all the time. Is a premier said, look, Dr. Christie, I don't even know what this systemic racism is. I've never seen it. I said, why would you? You're a rich white guy, so of course you wouldn't experience it or see it or know it. So this is where I want to go into some of the facts here. And I ran out of printer paper at home, so I had to make all my notes on my laptop. All right, so the first one Matthew mentioned in the video. So if we look at a bar graph, so you have your X and Y graphs. If you look at number of black people in the population, 3.5%. Caucasian people right now are about 75%. If you look at people, the percentage of black people in jail, Canadian federal prison population, that's 9%. So that's a 250% overrepresentation. That's a fact, right? So people can disagree about why that fact is there. But what I would submit is that if a variable is equitably distributed in the population, then these two bar graphs should be the same height. You see what I mean? And if there is an overrepresentation or an underrepresentation, you can say there is a systemic bias in the community. There's something driving that difference. We can disagree about what's driving that difference. We can talk about what's driving that difference. But I think that's a much more productive discussion than trying to define systemic racism. So to have that hard conversation, why would black or indigenous people be overrepresented. So blacks are overrepresented by 250%, indigenous people are by 600%. So you can say, what is it that's driving that? Why is there such an overrepresentation? Likewise, the converse is true. Caucasian people are 75% of the population, but what population of people in prison are there? 40-ish, give or take. So I would say that for going to jail, black is a risk factor, Caucasian is a protective factor. That's what the data says. And this, I think, for people to have hard conversations about why is that happening, that's a much different conversation than, say, trying to define systemic racism. So this is why I submit to you that I don't work on the definition, I try to work on the data. What are your thoughts on that? I can wait. Okay, but do you see the point I'm trying to make is that as opposed to looking at a definition or saying does this thing exist, we can look at problems. So there was a wonderful study published in the Canadian Medical Association Journal just in 2021. And instead of looking at policing numbers, I'll use healthcare where I have more expertise. But they looked at the post-operative outcomes for Indigenous people after receiving surgery. And if you control for everything, you control for age, you control for gender, you control for severity of disease, the only one variable that you leave is race. So if you're Indigenous, you have a 30% higher mortality rate than if you're Caucasian. This is after controlling for everything. If you're Indigenous, you will receive less C-sections if you have complications with surgery. You will die of infections more. You will receive less hips and knees for orthopedic surgery. This is what the data says. So it's hard to put your finger on it. Go ahead.
A quick question on that. We know that to be fact. What's the fact on accessibility? Because for those of us that have worked in significant Indigenous communities, the accessibility isn't there, right? Remote, northern. So how much of that data that I didn't get this was because we didn't have it in the community.
Absolutely. So, and those are the conversations that are important, right? So this study happened to control for accessibility. So it was a brilliant systematic review that said, we want to isolate this variable, so they had to control for all of those things. And you can do it statistically. And once you control for those things, this is what came out at the end of the calculation. But I find it fascinating, right? Because I work in the healthcare sector, and I don't think I know a doctor who would say, this woman is in labor, she's having complications, and I'm not going to do a C-section on her because she's Indigenous. That doesn't happen. But at the end of the day, when we look at the numbers, they don't get C-sections at an equitable rate. And it's just what the data says. So I think this is how complex the phenomenon is we're dealing with it. And I have a hard time understanding it. But once again, these are where I think we should be looking at is the outcomes for populations. If there's a problem with an outcome, then we can address it as opposed to broader discussions like systemic racism or something. But I enjoy questions, so there's got to be some, even if it's not a question or comment. Go ahead.
I think just to be the devil's advocate, I think there are certain things that it's just so hard. I mean, this is hard data, but let me give you this example. There's the fact that the Black community has rates of diabetes, but it has nothing to do with racism. Like, how do you take that factor? There are some variability here. Like, it's not everything about race. Like, how do you take those things out?
So there's no biological basis that put Black people in jail more than other people or Indigenous people. If we were able to peel everyone's skin off right now and just leave the skeleton and the muscles and our organs, there's no biological difference. You couldn't detect one. So race is an arbitrary factor, but it does influence these outcomes like I'm submitting to you. But I don't know if that's your question or not. I think
I love data, and I think about data a lot. I'm a finance guy here. Sometimes, I think the best way to learn about data is sometimes to try to disprove yourself, like try to find some fault with the data. And this just came to my mind that there are certain things that happen to us, that maybe it's outside of control and nothing to do with, like,
Yep.
not necessarily rooted in racism.
Okay, so this is great, because I'm going to disprove you here in a minute, but I want to follow up what you're saying. Right? So in ethics, there's two things people can disagree about. You can disagree about facts, and you can disagree about values. And this is an important distinction. So the technical term is if you disagree about facts, you have what's called a non-fundamental disagreement. If you disagree about values, you have a fundamental disagreement. So how do I tell the difference? Well, if we agree on the facts, but we disagree about what to do, we have a values conflict. But if we can't reach consensus over the factual information, then we have a factual conflict. We have a factual disagreement. So this woman's pregnant. We might disagree about whether she should be able to get an abortion or not, because we would value the status of the fetus differently. Right? So we don't disagree over the fact that she's pregnant. We disagree about what to do. What I'm trying to do with the data is at least get people to agree on the facts. So is this a real phenomenon that Black people are overrepresented in jail? Is it a real phenomenon that Indigenous people are overrepresented in jail? If this is a real phenomenon, all I'm asking is agreement on the facts. Now, we can look at the facts, we can understand the facts, we can analyze the facts, we can try to find out reasons for it. But if we can't agree on the facts, then we're saying there's no problem. And most of what I'm trying to do is submit to you, no, there is a problem. And the problem is not any individual. The problem is not malicious intent. The problem isn't a mentality on a person's position. But the problem is a systemic problem. It's the way the systems are set up. And that was the point of the first video we went through, is talk about systemic racism.
Okay, it may help, the definition of systemic itself as a racism. And I think that is the part that's being misunderstood here. Diabetes, the greater representation of diabetes, if you go to places where Blacks are represented outside of the Western civilization, diabetes is not a massive problem. So then you come back over here, and then you look at how would that become a race-based problem. Well, they already point, you have to look at a different set of stats at that point, and look at poverty levels, and who can afford healthy food, and who has highly processed and junk foods left over, technically usually always sent to the food banks. That is what ended up being the second problem that has systematic connection to the end result. So these stats are proving that there's connection in the facts, like that this fact is a problem. Now, after everyone agrees on this, that this is a problem, we can look at what are the points in the system that would cause this outcome. A very unintentional type of racism, not stating that people are making, as you say, these decisions to say, well, no, we're not going to give these people this benefit of the doubt because of their race, but something that is rooted in consideration for how it may affect that race more so. So non-intentional, I hope. Is that better, Cliff?
I like your comment. I appreciate it, because one of the things that the human mind does is it's always jumping to conclusions. It's just a function of our brain. If I give you a statement here with half a word in it, or write the words backwards, people can actually read it, because the mind just jumps to conclusions. It doesn't necessarily see what's in front of it, but it jumps to conclusions. Because it's a machine for making associations. So what I think you're talking about is an inference of causality. So if I say Black people are overrepresented in jail or whatever is going on, people's minds are going to go, well, what's causing that? It's not race that's causing that, it's something else. It's access to services, it's lack of access, it's this. But what I would say is let's slow down, and instead of jumping to causality, let's just look at the outcome first. So we're looking at the outcomes, trying to understand the outcomes, and then we do have to have a real conversation about causality. But it's premature to explain causality before you understand the problem. So I think that's consistent with what you're saying. All right, so to jump ahead a little bit, I want to watch a couple more videos, but I want to follow up on your comment for local data. So we have BLM and New Brunswick Community College just did a study, and how much did you get for the study to do it? 100,000. To look at some what race-based data is collected in New Brunswick. So I thought we collected it through health, education, and policing as well. But I thought for you folks, the most relevant would be policing. But we have other disciplines. So I'll read this to you and then I'll write down the highlights. But let's do Fredericton. We'll just focus on Fredericton because we have Fredericton occasionally. But in Fredericton, Black people make up 1.69% of the population, and they make up 6.93% of people that have had an interaction with police, however you want to define that. Also, if we look at just street checks, in Fredericton, in this year that we looked at it, we had 597 street checks in total. Out of those, 11 street checks were for Black people, 67 were Indigenous, and 510 were white people.
Hello, Miriam.
But out of these 597 stops, there were 71 charges laid out of the 597. Out of the 71 charges, 52% or 37 were for Black people, 20% or 28 or 20% were for Indigenous people, and then there were 14 charges against white people, or 20%. So everyone kind of gets that? So you look at all the people that are stopped for a street check, there's only 11 stops for street checks on Black people, that results in 37 charges. For Caucasian people, there are 510 stops, and it results in 14 charges. Is there a disproportion there? Do we know why there's a disproportion? Maybe, maybe not. But I think this is useful data to say, boy, you don't seem to be stopping Black people a lot, but when you do, there's a lot of charges associated with it. On the other hand, you seem to be stopping white people a lot, but not doing much. Does that mean the fact that you're white means the probability of doing something naughty is lower? Maybe, maybe not. What do we think of these numbers that BLM produced? Go ahead.
Okay, I'm just going to be devil's advocate here, but of those 11 people, even though there's 37, what if the 2 of those people are your most wanted in all those charges? So that skews your data there. Same thing. And because I, as an Indigenous person, yes, I'm with you now, but at the same time, I can honestly say I've never, out of uniform, been pulled over because I'm Indigenous.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't, well, I try to follow the rules of the road and all those things, and I don't think when I hear these things, and I know it happens, I'm not saying it doesn't, but some people bring it on. Like I think of walking in a grocery store, and I've seen some people go say, oh, well, we're followed to the store because the store clerks think we're going to shop with them. When I'm walking through the store myself, I'm looking to see, does anyone follow me? No. But I'm not coming in with my hood up, hiding my face, and doing things. Because I'll look to see, am I targeted because I'm an Indigenous person?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I am. But I don't know. Maybe sometimes if we're looking so hard for it, maybe we start to think, oh, that person. But if I'm looking around, then I start to look sketchy, right? So those are just things. There's various circumstances that change things. So just to point out.
Yeah. So can we follow that up
Yeah.
a little bit? All right. So she's the deputy, so it's fair to pick on her. And what you've identified, I think, is the fundamental problem with the way we address racism in Canada right now. is everything says, is it because I'm indigenous? Is it because I'm black? And what was my original statement about why I won't define systemic racism? What was my statement? Why did I say that? Because it's irrational. So, is it possible for sometimes it's because you're indigenous and sometimes it's not? Is it possible that sometimes it's because you're black and sometimes you're not? Is it possible that the same person today likes indigenous people and tomorrow doesn't? She likes blacks and tomorrow doesn't? Is it possible that someone can marry a black woman and still be racist against black guys? Yes. So the principle of consistency cannot be applied to an irrational activity. And this would be what my response to you is. Sometimes I am stopped because I'm black. I know it for a fact. I bought a new car, I was driving to the gym, I had a hoodie on, and I've been pulled over by undercover guys with a dog and the badges around their neck. And they said to me, you must be surprised that undercover people are pulling you over because I didn't have a tag on my license plate. And I said, well, I have the tags right here, and it's just raining. So I was waiting for it to dry before I put them on. And I also have until the end of the month to change the tag. And they said, I bet you're surprised that we stopped you. And I said, no, I'm not surprised at all, because I'm a young guy, and I was younger at the time, wearing a hoodie, driving a new car, and I was stopped. I didn't have any infraction. The tags on my plate were still good till the end of the month, but I was stopped. Do I have to show that it's only because I'm black? Or can I show that I'm black and this happened? And this is where I would say the mentality of looking at things saying, is it because of this? Is it because of that? That's an oversimplification of how of the phenomenon we're dealing with. Because it's not that simple. And prude people are famous for saying racism is spit, shine, and polish. It's not as simple as because of one of these things.
Well, you know what, I agree with you. It's good to look at it in different perspectives. And I just look at from being, other areas where I've been, and but I've also received within my own community, within my own people, let's change that, with my own people, because of the uniform I wear.
Yeah.
That it's not about me. I've been told, hey, it's not you, honey, it's what you represent, the uniform. Instead of looking at me as a person. Right, so we battle those, I think, everywhere, just because we're trying, and I look at it, I wear the uniform with pride, but I also wear it to hope to change and get more people in the same situation so we can change these systemic barriers that are out there for people.
Yeah, so the point that you just made is the argument for inclusion and diversity, right? So diversity is simply, hiring up women, hiring up blacks, hiring up whatever. But inclusion is the actual important thing. So making an indigenous person a deputy, that's meaningful inclusion in a system. And when you get a...
Go ahead, just finish.
No, I want to hear what you're going to say.
No, it's just so interesting. You talked about age and you talked about gender. And I was wondering if you guys looked at the data in that, from that perspective. Does age make a difference, or does gender make a difference within these?
The policing data I just gave?
Yes.
I don't think so.
It's consistent.
The only variable we looked at was race. So you can break it down and say, is it younger black guys, older black guys, whatever.
So you said something there that I really want to challenge. I talked about diversity and inclusion. So you said making an indigenous woman or indigenous person a deputy, we don't make them. She qualifies with all her qualifications and everything she brings to it. Plus she's indigenous, plus she's a female. But if she didn't have the qualifications initially, she wouldn't get the job because she's indigenous or because she's a female. So I just take exception to the make at that. So that's sorry, but that's.
You can say sorry, but I'm not going to let you get away with it that easy.
My name's Bob Bruce, I'm the chief. Yeah.
Oh, you're the chief. So you're another good person to pick on. So what the chief has said is what I would submit to you is called the myth of meritocracy. The myth of meritocracy. The idea is that people get to where they are because of their work, because of what they've done, because of what they've accomplished, because of what they've studied. So for instance, I have a PhD and 2 masters. So nobody can say I have my job because I'm black. I've earned where I am. But this is, I'm gonna follow this through. There's something called the absence of an impediment that prevents people from earning the things. So if I give an example, I grew up in Moncton in the 1970s. I was allowed to live with my parents. I was allowed to speak the language they taught me. I was allowed to go to school. I was allowed to go to school with my brothers and my cousins and other relatives. At that same time, there was residential schools running in New Brunswick. An Indigenous guy, exactly my age, exactly same city, was not allowed to live with his family. He was not allowed to speak the language his parents taught him. He was not allowed to go to school with his cousins, siblings, whatever. So now, we're both 52 years old. Do I deserve what I have and he doesn't? Or was he prevented from getting something? So the myth of meritocracy is, yes, there are people that make it through the system and they work their asses off. But our system is also designed to work for some people, not for others. So that guy I just gave you an example of has so many barriers in his life, so many obstacles that are invisible to Caucasian people. They were invisible to me. So this is where I would say, I'm not disputing the credential of your deputy, but I would say that there's, when we say to people, all of us are where we are because of merit, I would say that might or might not be true. And the absence of an impediment, the absence of a problem is also there. And that's a perfect segue into the next video, but I'll let you respond before I go to the next video.
I don't argue with that. People don't have opportunities for a number of reasons. The biggest reason is, I believe, in this country is the financial barriers that we have, and then you'll back that up with other things about why that happens, and there's hard data on that. I just always, especially when we're in these conversations, I would suggest that you would also take a stand here personally, that if somebody said, well, the only reason that you're a tenured professor wherever you are, we're not worried about your credentials because you're black. I think, okay, I won't speak for you. If it was me, I would take exception to say, yes, maybe I did have opportunities that other people didn't have, but I worked very, very hard to get here. I have the experience, I have the knowledge, I have the education, and I've done this. So I think it takes away from people that have accomplished things like Deputy Dwyer, who is Indigenous, to just say, well, you know, we made her a deputy because she's Indigenous. That's not the process she went to. Now, would everybody have that opportunity that she had and got where she got? I agree that no. So there's a bunch of different barriers, but I think that it diminishes what people learn. Like, I think it would diminish everything that you did in your career, in your life, if somebody said to you, and don't answer this, is that the only reason you got that job was because you were black.
Yeah. So let's back up a little bit. When I mentioned the deputy being Indigenous, what was the comment I was making? What was the context? Did I come out and say she's a deputy because she's Indigenous?
No, but
What
word that
I know you picked up on one word, right? But you stopped listening to the whole sentence.
possibly,
And the whole context.
sure, okay.
And we have to try to listen carefully. So I'm trying to say, I'm using this as a teaching moment here. I was talking about the concept of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I said inclusion is the meaningful involvement of people like. So I might have misspoke saying making her a deputy. I should have said having Indigenous people as deputies, having them in power positions. So we were talking about inclusion. I wasn't talking about affirmative action or promoting people based on race or gender.
So if you had said that, I wouldn't have said it. But you're right, because that's what I picked up on.
Yeah. It's kind of like talking to my ex-wife.
I'm glad you compared it. I don't think that's fair either, because you don't really know a lot about me, but okay.
Well, all right, so let's go to we're going to follow up on this conversation though about lack of impediment. And we'll do one more video and then see where we're at. And this one should really provoke people. It's on white privilege. If I can find it. Okay.
So this is what I want to share, and I'll go back to Zoom. And I'm going to share screen. White privilege. What a derogatory term, right? As soon as people hear it, they shut down. And I can understand why. Many white people have hard lives, just like anybody else. They can be poor, underemployed, harassed, and even end up in jail. Now, given the hardships that white people also experience, can we really say that white privilege exists?
Simply put, white privilege means that whatever hardships a white person experiences, they are not because of the color of their skin. The struggles, difficulties, and challenges of their lives are very real, but they are not because they are white.
For many black and indigenous people, however, it could be simply because of the color of their skin that the police engage in racial profiling, spot checks, street checks, and maybe even something far worse. Now, white privilege does not mean that white people do not face challenges too. They most certainly do. But it does mean that they don't face challenges simply because of the color of their skin.
So what are some examples of white privilege?
73% of the Canadian population is white, but they make up only 55% of the federal prison population.
People shot and killed by police, only 30% of those people were white.
Unemployment rates among white people is 7.3% and 9.5% among visible minorities.
White people are less likely to be infected with COVID-19. And if they are infected, they're less likely to be hospitalized. And there are no biological explanations for this difference.
So there's no question that our systems work to the advantage of white people. So why is it so offensive to talk about white privilege?
As a society, we've been aware of the disparities for years between racialized communities and white people. The problem is that for generations, these racial stereotypes have been used to explain the disparities. Now, if you believe these stereotypes, then you can understand why black people are killed at disproportionate rates, or why the police must engage in racial profiling, if you believe.
But if you understand that these stereotypes are not true, and they have been contrived and developed over generations and centuries to perpetuate white supremacy, then you are left with a serious question. Why is it that black and indigenous people are so overrepresented in the negative parts of our system, and white people are so underrepresented? Part of the explanation? White privilege.
Black people are not stopped the same, they're not arrested the same, they're not charged the same, they're not put in jail the same. And likewise, our education and health sectors do not treat black and indigenous people the same. The solution? Not to eliminate white privilege, but to demand for a society where everyone enjoys fairness, justice, and equality.
Certain facial expressions being made seen as aggression. Like I know one of my most confused faces is my face of confusion. Automatically gets assumed as aggression. And it's a very real experience. So like without, if we could kind of relook at that video, but without looking at it as just being because we're skin color, and it's because we're different, I guess would be a better way to kind of put it. We're misunderstood. There's a lot that they don't know about our ways of being, culture, like to just kind of untie that simplification for a second. Do you think it would even help us if we kind of make sure that people know statistical data on how common it is for different races to misread other races' intentions?
Well, let me see if I can follow that up. So I did an online test, and it's a thing where they give you a word and then a picture of a person, and it measures your response time. And it's supposed to figure out if you have a preference for black people, white people, whatever. And of course, I grew up in a white family in Moncton, and sure enough, I have a preference for white people. That's what my unconscious bias was. So when I am associated with words and I'm under a time pressure and my mind's making associations, this computer program said, this is my unconscious bias. So I think what you were saying, and I don't, what's your name? Jamaica. I think what Jamaica is saying was a reference to unconscious bias.
Very much so. And if that being a big factor in why it's kind of tried to simplify as based on the color of the skin, but like at the same time, a simplification that people misunderstand, like the color of the skin is the simplest way to put it. Being a different color means you have different attributes and or a different bias when it comes to different colors. So seeing a black person dressed in, like when I'm home and I'm dressed in comfy, I'm in my sweats and about to run to the store with a thing. I've got 5 kids, so I'm not dressing up. I do not look like this at all when I'm out, if you guys see me out and about, but I often do get followed. And some of that behavior is, like the sketchy behavior is I'm nervous because I have been accused. So, but my nerves get misread as, well, she's acting suspicious. Like, you know, put my hand in the pocket, realizing I need to take them out because people are staring at me funny, those type of things, I feel like are the, you know, just explaining affecting me and as a colored person, where I would feel like it's the color of my skin that I'm being judged by, because my white counterpart could run out, or, you know, just another Caucasian counterpart could run out in their slacks, their jogging suit, and they don't have, you know, that judgment that they might be a gang member or a ghetto person because they're not dressing, you know, more similar to everyone else. Where I actually would have to worry about that simply because my skin is darker, so it's easier to perceive that I would choose ghetto if I'm dressed darker and or dressed like that and colored.
Yeah, so there's a lot to it, right?
Yeah, like,
But I guess the point would be an unconscious bias. So
yeah.
let me just take a second before we conclude to introduce the concept of bias and see what you think. So this is what I do with my students. So it's a group activity to talk about bias. So if everyone could just clear their throat, please. Okay, now those of you that have a cup, if you could spit in your cup, and when you spit enough in your cup, drink it. Now, yes, there's always a young guy in my class that lives in residence, wants to drink a cup of spit and show everybody that he's doing it. He wants them to see it. But what I do to my students, I say, tell me why you don't want to drink a cup of spit. You just swallow it without issue. So why don't you want to? And they'll say, because I think it's gross. I'll say, why is it gross? You just swallowed without an issue. And they'll say, well, I don't know, but it is gross because if you made me do it, I might vomit. I'll say, yeah, I know. So this is what I would submit is an idea of bias. It's something that's so ingrained in us, so obvious to us, so clear to us that we accept it uncritically. So like this video said, 150 years of stereotypes that are hammered into us from every aspect of society. It's very easy to believe these stereotypes. So for instance, I was giving a talk once and we were looking at people in foster care. And out of all the kids in foster care, 52% are Indigenous. Once again, they make up 4.5% of the population. So it's a fair enough question to say, is that system designed to take away Indigenous kids? And because it seems to do it quite well. But the person in my talk said, well, but if you look at some of the conditions people grow up in, well, that explains it. I said, no, I live in Rothsay, and I know the conditions there for substance use, for lots of things, can be just the same as anywhere else in the country. But we don't lose our kids at those rates. So this person was believing the stereotypes that they were given. So I think we're going to conclude. So what I want to do is say, we started off looking at the objectives that I was given. What should we know about the Black community in St. John? And I submitted to you that I would replace the word community with people. We talked a little bit about the history of Black History Month, and then how do we build better and stronger relations with the Black community. This is where I said we should stop looking at definitions of things like systemic racism. We should try to consider data, and if we don't have data, we should be collecting the data properly and controlling for all of the confounders and the variables and the biases that could be in it. But without data, we're blind. And then in addition to that, I said there are some things that happen. So we have unconscious bias, there's microaggressions, and some of these other things. So I don't want to have the last word, so I'll turn it over to you guys, or back to the deputy.
Well, you know what, you made a lot of good points there in terms of especially the term people. Because I've always said, you know, one day racism hopefully is gone, where we look at people as, someone looks at me as, this is honey, not honey's a female, honey's indigenous, this, that we know each other just, and not even see color, we just see each other. So no, this is good, but I like the term people. Thank you.
You're very welcome. All right. Any other last words, comments, questions? Go ahead.
I have a couple questions. So I'm in my 30s, early 30s, and when I was going to school, there were efforts at that time, however misguided, to try to create a dialogue about equality, which kind of became equality as sameness, and perhaps we're all the same. I find that part of the challenge that people my age seem to be having is how do we consider equality with diversity? Like how do you celebrate difference while maintaining your dialogue about equality? And I think that conversations like this, perhaps it's enough to talk about it and understand it in a better way. So I guess that would be one thing. And I guess another question I have is, and I only know of one sort of real attempt at doing this, and my information on this is really anecdotal, so I don't know the stats or anything, but I know in British Columbia, years ago, there was a big effort for police forces specifically to try to hire more people who were from India, or first generation or second generation from India, because the proportions of the population versus like these people are police officers versus these people are not, and they did hire more people from groups or from those communities, however loosely defined. And I'm always been curious, does the systemic aspect of racism create a scenario where even if you hire more people from diverse groups, are those people affected by the systemic racism to the point where they continue the trends, or do they actually have an effect on the trends in the positive way that, like, because organizations like this are very problem-solving people, so they'll go, problem is A, fix it with B, results with C, X, Y, data, good, you know, and I wonder if those work, or if the myriad of issues that cause this problem, do those propagate with simple solution making?
So I love the two questions, and I think they're connected. So I'm going to try to start with the first one and move into the second one.
And I'm really only in the middle of a thought.
Oh, did I interrupt you? Did I interrupt you?
This is an hour of life-changing info, you know?
All right. So let me start off with an anecdote, okay? There was a snowstorm, and at the school, the janitor is shoveling off the front step. And one of the students comes and says, my friend in a wheelchair needs the ramp, so can you shovel the ramp as well? So the janitor said, yes, when I'm done this step, so that the students can get in, I'll go do the ramp. And the student said to him, if you do the ramp first, all the students can get in. If you do the steps first, which is your norm, because you're taught this in normal, do the steps first, not everybody can get in. And this is the difference between diversity and inclusion. Inclusion would be the approach where you say, we're going to shovel that ramp first because we want to include everybody in a meaningful way. Diversity is just a representation. So you can have a diverse group of people, but if they're not meaningfully included, if they don't get to share in the power, if they don't get to make the decisions, if they don't get to participate in it, you have this problem. So examples would be when we looked at women's rights, right? So you can have a woman CEO, but it doesn't mean that women in the organization get pay equity. How can that be? You have a woman at the top, and then you have inequities in pay. Well, because she's there, she's diverse, she's representing a group, but it might be similar to the comments I made earlier where I said, you know, no one else represents my opinions. So I think the first part of your question was about equity and inclusion.
Yeah, and I find that when we talked about the insidiousness of some of this, it's like that education that I think I received in the 90s about equal, same, really kept the pyramid of, it kept the pyramid the same.
Right.
Like it didn't, there was, people get to feel better, but there really wasn't any mobility that there should have been, you know, like that people would have the same opportunities. So I've often been critical of that, and I don't know, you know.
Yeah, well, like I said, the difference between equality and equity would be like the difference between the stairs and the ramp. So we can pretend we're treating everyone equally, but when we shovel the steps before the ramp, are we truly treating them equally? And the answer might be, no, not really. We think we are. We built a ramp for them, right? It's just that it's not a meaningful inclusion in that sense. But the other part of your question is this myth we were taught when we were growing up about equality and treating people the same. And this is we talk about the myth of meritocracy. There's the myth of a colorblind society where people say, I don't see color. Well, what's the point of saying that? Why would we say I don't see color? Well, because we think that if I say I see color, then I can be labeled with a label like racist or whatever. The reality is I see color, but it shouldn't matter. That's a different thing. How can I see color and it not matter? It can't be from denying color. So one of my students yesterday is, he showed up on Tuesday. He showed up on class, and this is the second week of February. So we've had 5 or 6 classes so far this term. He's been late every one. So I said to him, have you made it to class on time yet? And he said, no. I said, why not? And he's a Muslim kid. So I said, because I have to take the bus to the university campus. And then when I get here, it's time for prayers. So when I finish my prayers, I come in. So if I treated him the same as everyone, what would I do? I put my foot down and say, come to class on time. But if I want to include him in my class in a meaningful way, do I have to kind of make an accommodation for a few minutes he takes to pray? But I appreciate the question, so thank you. I don't know if that answered them or not.
I think the second part of the question, I'm almost just curious about because this data is, you can't argue, right? Part of the point of this, you can't argue against it. But I wonder what is effective? What is effective to combat it? I know that's probably very complicated because of opportunity, socioeconomic factors, you know, bias, systemic racism. I wonder if the best efforts of anybody are working.
Yeah.
Because I don't hear those. I don't hear about that.
Yeah. And this is the rub, right? Took 300 years to cause this problem. And if I had 300 years of free labor like the US did, I'd be a superpower as well. So you cannot undo that instantly. You can't get into the heart of that instantly. And that's why what I'm trying to do is refocus the discussion. So with the premier and his friends, when I was talking with them, they were saying, give us a definition of this. What is the definition of systemic racism? I said, you guys are missing the point. There's a problem. Let's identify the problem and look at solutions. And the problems are going to be different, right? So if you look at our hospitals, we have a policy that when you come to the emergency department and you need psychiatry, if you don't have an acute psychiatric condition that requires hospitalization, we don't admit you. We had a patient there, they came in, they said, I'm symptomatic, I need help. We said, you need service in the community, you don't have an acute psychiatric condition that requires hospitalization, and they went and jumped off the bridge. So does that policy work for most people? Maybe. Does it work for these people that are really sick? Maybe not. So part of the equity approach is you say, okay, I know I have a policy in place, but who does it not work for? So now in the hospital, we're going through every one of our policies with the analysis of who does this not work for. So I think my only thing I could submit for a solution to some of these problems is it's a big job, but we have to start looking at from the data and the outcomes and working back, not working front to back, but here are the problems in society. So do we have a problem in education? Sure. The studies show that if you're suspended from school, Black kids get suspended at rates twice as much as Caucasian kids. Bingo, we have a problem with suspensions. We can look at that. In healthcare, we have a problem with access to mental health and addiction service. Bingo, we can address that, and so on and so forth. So there's no one thing I can do to solve all of this. But thank you for the questions. And thank you, I don't want to have the last word. Any other thoughts or comments? All right, well, thank you very much. Class dismissed.
Yeah, I'd like to thank Dr. Christie for taking his time. I think when we talk about changes, how do we make the relationship stronger? This is a step towards it. It's understanding and learning what we can about each other as people. Like I learned, using the word community, using people. It's changing those little things that change. And I hope we build better relationships together, but it's learning. And like you said, it didn't happen overnight. It's going to take years, but it's each of us working towards it. So thank you.
Oh, yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
So, first I just want to say a very good afternoon to everyone in this room this afternoon. So it's been a great honor for us to be a part of this discussion this afternoon. So my name is Christie Iroko. I work with Proof Inc. and my role is Newcomer Women Leadership Program Coordinator. But for the purpose of this Black History Month, I'm coordinating the Black History Month events. And one of the most important things we thought we could do this month was to create what we call Breaking the Barriers Speakers Series. And so what we just listened to today is one of those series where we get Black professionals in the communities to come in here or go online, wherever, during lunch hour to talk to us about how they're breaking barriers in their own space, in their communities, and then how what they're doing is shaping the future of Canada for everyone, Black and non-Black. And so today I'm joined in by my colleague, Rob, my photographer, Brenda is here, and then Wellington is online, and everyone who is online here with us as well. I just want to thank Inspector Anika. Thank you for joining us today, and you just try out, and we're glad you could join us here. And then without much ado, just a very big thank you to the police chief, deputy, all of you here, who's been very gracious to welcome us to this space to be a part of this great discussion. And most interestingly, thank you, Dr. Christie, for such insights and great wisdom. I don't know, like he said, it's like 1 hour of overload of great information. Thank you so much for your time, for your wisdom. And we hope we could do this again, not just in February, again, but every other month, because again, Black excellence is celebrated throughout the year. And again, that goes for every other community and people like Deputy Honey just mentioned. So again, thank you for helping us kind of refocus on what words are important and how to lead going forward. So thank you, everyone, and good afternoon.
Thank you. And there's water, coffee. Remember, lunch and learn, so feed the brain. Thank you.
Hi, like you. Yeah, we did in 80. Yeah, back in 2000. Just pre.